Now, Paul had been working through this entire time, trying to bring unity. He's been working through getting them to live a life worthy of the calling of God. And when he's doing this, he's pleading with Euodia and Syntyche, and he's pleading with the church to help them. He's talking about having the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. That's that hymn that we looked at in Philippians chapter 2. And in the process of encouraging them and doing all of these things to look and be more like Jesus and to put others first around you, Paul now moves to his last element in this letter, and it's how he ends it. And what Paul had been doing this entire time is this. Paul felt compelled because he was a relationship builder, and he wanted the Gentile church and the Jewish church to come together. We see that in Romans, where he's writing to get those two to come together. But one of the things that Paul felt compelled to do as he was going around to all of these Gentile, non-Jewish churches, he's collecting an offering. And he's collecting that offering to take back to the Jerusalem church as a way to say, thank you for your faithfulness and for those original 12 Jewish guys and when the 120 women and guys in the upper room who went out and began to preach the gospel. And so for Paul, he thought it was hugely important to take up this financial offering to help the Jerusalem church that had experienced all of the persecution. And so not only was he doing that, he was also receiving offerings. And we see Paul getting into this relationship with different churches. So, for instance, he has to manipulate the Corinthian church to give to that Jerusalem offering. But the Philippian church, he didn't have to do that. As a matter of fact, they willingly gave him offering money for that, but also financially supported him. And it's interesting, if you remember back in the day, some of us are old enough to remember when mail actually came in a mailbox. It still sort of does this time of year in November. So they would send you, when they sent you a letter, oftentimes they would send you a penny attached to a piece of paper. And it's sort of that thing to guilt you. Now we've given you something, and now they want something in return, right? So when Paul writes to the Corinthian church, he wants no money from them whatsoever. Because in that culture, the minute that he receives money, he's dedicated and obligated to them in an honor-shame culture to reciprocate something. And Paul, with that Corinthian church, was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to be connected to you in that way, in any way, shape, or form. But that wasn't the case with the Philippian church. But as I was reading this week and just praying over it and doing some study, it was fascinating that it's actually, I think, not even a letter about, it is about the offering and thanking them for this offering. But it's also, for Paul, the idea and the concept of contentment. And I don't know about you, but that's a struggle at times. Right? Even in our current culture. And so when Paul begins writing, he begins writing this section of the letter. He says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord. This is chapter 4, verse 10. Now, in some English translations, it reads this way, that at last you have renewed your concern for me, as though Paul was like, come on, what's taking you so long? And yet that's not what's going on in the Greek. I've actually offered a slightly different translation. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord, and in your translations it has that, better as because your concern flourished. It began to bear fruit again. And so they've had this concern. And we'll find out, indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. So Paul is rejoicing, and notice he's using that phrase again that we looked at, in the Lord. And he says that you were concerned, but that concern was now able to bear fruit again. Now, we don't know why, And so when he says, you had no opportunity to show, Paul is praising them not just for their concern, but he's praising them for acting on that and doing something about it. And that isn't unlike James chapter 2, where James says, listen, someone comes to you and they're hungry and they're naked, and you look at them and you say, in Southern language, bless your heart, right? You know what? I'm going to pray for you. Walk away. And this poor person, they have no food, they have no clothes, they're naked as a jaybird, and you're like, I'm going to pray for you while you walk away with your nice shirt, top of it, coat on top of that, and like so in the midst of this, I think Paul and James are in some ways getting, because James will come back and he'll challenge them. He'll say, listen, what good is if you act upon it? So Paul is praising not only but also that they put their. And another way to think about this is that love does. It isn't just, I mean, praying is important. Prayer, all sorts of things. So he goes on and he says this when he's writing to chapter 12. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm, and then Paul makes, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstance. Now, statement, I have learned. This isn't something that God just dropped on his grave. This isn't something that, some people have the gift of faith and some people have the gift of this and some people have the gift of this. Paul had the gift of no. He says, I have learned to be whatever. And then he goes on. I know what it is. Now, to be also. And he says, I know what it is. I mean, we can phrase this in all sorts of ways. I know what it's like to be at that place where the stocks were overly valued. I know what it was like to survive after that. And in the midst of that, Paul has experienced both of these things, and yet he says, I have learned to. And then when he repeats it, it gets translated